Well, thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us today at, when we're talking about one of really the bright sectors in the Indian startup ecosystem. There was a time when SaaS was not considered to be one of the most sexiest sectors, and how tides have turned and things have changed. And now investors are lapping on behind the the SaaS startup ecosystem because of the business predictability and a lot more. But this opportunity is largely set to grow even further. So let me get the discussion started by asking all three of you, talk to us a little bit in terms of the key global SaaS trends that you're seeing coming out, and where does India stand, or Indian startups building for the global opportunities stand in these in the massive SaaS opportunity that's coming in. Let me start with you, Maneesh. Over to you, Chaithanya, and then Dev. Maneesh, please.
Yeah, I think SaaS is definitely an exciting opportunity. Software, in my view, has always been exciting. I actually come from the last century where we had to go and install software at a customer's premises. We had to hire salespeople all over the world to get our software out to customers. I think if I look at where we are today, I can summarize it into 4 Ds: distribution, discoverability, distributed talent, and at the same time, departmental buying. So these 4 Ds, Tarush, is what is really driving growth of SaaS, not just from India, but all over the world. It's if you have a specific problem that you can solve, you can now architect it on the cloud, take it to customers globally, and deliver value. I think that's the benefit that customers are deriving out of SaaS.
To you, Chaithanya, the same question.
So I'll essentially explain this particular problem from the other side of things as well, right? So globally, what we've been observing primarily being a SaaS management platform as well, right, is we've been seeing a huge trend in companies adopting a lot of SaaS as well. Primarily, the numbers were essentially astonishing for ourselves. For example, for a 500-employee company, when we started over 2 years ago, the average number of applications they were using were close to about 187. Now that's almost incremented by close to 30 to 40% in the last 2 years. So the average number is close to about 243. Companies have started sort of realizing that more often or not, instead of building things completely on their own, if there's a solution that's currently available itself, let's actually start adopting those particular ones itself. So what we've currently seen is essentially just the beginning of things itself, right? Because today, depending on the reports itself, SaaS penetration in the market is just around 38 to 40%. It's expected to reach close to about 98 to 99% itself by 2027 itself. So we have a huge opportunity ahead of us. And I think specifically with India as well, right? So it's extremely very, very lucrative market for us as well in India, because there's huge growth potential itself for us to essentially get to that. At the same time, what we also see is that this is rightly placed for Indian ecosystem as well to develop in the SaaS sort of ecosystem as well.
Sure, Dave.
Yeah. Yes, and so just to add on to what Maneesh and Chaithanya said, right? I think given the fact that pretty much every enterprise today is looking at between 150 to 200 SaaS applications, I think it's an enormous opportunity for India, right? And some of the ingredients that make India ready is one, of course, the access. I mean, you have entrepreneurs today who have been there, done that, right? They've come from the services ecosystem, but now they know how to kind of build software, right? The access to the talent that's available within India, and also the ability for people within India to kind of build that go-to-market, right? Be it kind of a product-like growth, or even if it could be, let's say, an inbound or an outbound, using the India kind of cost arbitrage, right? So I think these are some of the reasons why we are seeing, I think from a timing perspective, it's now for India to kind of take on. The numbers also are there. We see that This year it was like a $8 billion market for Indian SaaS companies that's expected to grow almost 70% year over year and reach almost a 100 billion market, right? And we have like, I think 21st, 22nd unicorn out of the 100 unicorns that we have. And so, yeah, I think all the ingredients are there for us to, kind of take this over. So, yeah.
No, absolutely. And I know that entrepreneurs are not big fans of calling themselves unicorns or not calling themselves unicorns. But I think this year, when you see the overall spectrum, I think, 60-70% of the companies that you see are companies which are in the software space, right? And taking the discussion forward to what you said, Dev, especially about the mentality shifting from services to product, right? And the fact that India can provide a better cost arbitrage. There is great tech talent which is there. What else, according to you guys, does come across when you flip the board and see an Indian company competing with the global majors, especially, and trying to kind of sell the SaaS and trying to kind of establish themselves into the Americas or those kind of markets? Where do you think that, the Indian SaaS in terms of characteristics, in terms of dynamicity, fits differently from the global stage? So let me start with you first, Chaithanya, and then move to Dev and Maneesh you later.
Sure, right. So here's where we typically look at it, right? So number one is India, as you mentioned, right? India has always been the particular gold mine for talent. So that's always been there, but it was finally, directed with services itself. But right now, the upcoming talent, or essentially the new people who are essentially coming up as well, right? Their mentality and their thought process itself has completely changed towards, I need to build something new instead of joining larger organizations itself to essentially work on a smaller feature or essentially part of their particular growth. Let me try to essentially build something new. That's been enormous, successful in the current scenarios itself, right? So people coming right out of colleges as well, trying to build something new. And that's a advantage that perhaps India only has right now today, given that the amount of youth that we actually have in India. So that compared with essentially being very, very cost effective, right? So we can Indian SaaS ecosystem can actually deliver the same quality at a very, very competitive pricing. So especially because of the cost effectiveness itself that you're able to get over there, the margins are actually a lot better as well. So that brings out, in the global sort of scenario, very, very competitive pricing. At the same time, retain the same sort of quality, or even actually providing better quality as well. And the last one again, right? So India has always been the very, very hub for essentially support sort of scenarios itself. So with essentially cost effectiveness system, we're able to deliver a lot of great support itself, and in the SaaS products as well, which has been one of the key essential things itself for people to either transition towards SaaS itself or adopting a new solution. So in this particular scenario, support has always been a very, very important piece of success itself for every SaaS organization. And that right from India, we're able to deliver across 24/7 and at an amazing, very well, I would say, at a very good support itself. So these are three key areas itself that I see that India is going to be a very, very good player itself in the whole SaaS ecosystem itself, all across all the world.
No, so definitely you're saying that there is a change towards more entrepreneurs coming up. There is a change towards product, and also the fact that, the resiliency of the ecosystem to say that, we are going to be providing 24/7 support and what we do. Moving to you, Dev, I mean, where do you think that is the true flavor or the different flavor for Indian SaaS rather in the global stage?
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of reiterate what Chaithanya said, right? I think it really comes down to the access to talent, right? Just to give you a stat at AWS, just over the I think 3 years ago, we had kind of trained around 250,000 people in cloud skills. That's now up to 1.2 million this year. And we are kind of on track to do kind of 5 million kind of trainings just within that, right? And we're seeing this happen across not just in tier 1 cities, tier 2, tier 3 cities, and these are advanced skills, right? Things that a SaaS company will require, like AI, ML, analytics, which is kind of core to kind of building out and differentiating your SaaS offering, right? So I think the ability to kind of get access to this is really critical and at the right price point, which is what we are seeing, right? So I just wanted to leave it at that. That's really the critical success in my viewpoint right now.
Sure, Maneesh.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, Tarush, India is sort of like the perfect melting pot If I talk about SaaS, I think we've been building up to this moment of the last 3 to 4 decades. Right? You have this whole, pillar of GSIs, more than 1 million developers sitting there working across functions, across industries, across countries, servicing customers from a tech perspective. So there's that expertise sitting there. Then you also have the global innovation centers. So people, again, working on, whether it is e-commerce, whether it is financial services, or even software product development, right? You have the talent sitting in India working on these global products in India. Then you also have the startups. So many of the folks, they would have moved out from a GSI or a GIC, taken that wealth of knowledge and built, let's say, a B2C company. We have enough examples of an analytics company or a retail company or, our very own homegrown e-commerce company that have stepped out from these. They scale, and the people working in these startups realize problems that they could solve from a SaaS perspective. Hey, I need HR solutions. Hey, I need infrastructure solutions to scale. And they were stepping out and creating SaaS companies. So the supply chain that is followed has been phenomenal up till now. And it's the talent that is bringing everything towards SaaS. And when we talk about talent, we all know that there are more than 1 million engineers coming out of colleges in India almost every year. Right? And that's going to feed back into the same ecosystem. So the word ecosystem is always cyclical, right? So this will keep on continuing. And this is a very, very unique position. I always get into conversations on, China versus Israel versus, Germany versus India. I think the combination of the whole GSI, GIC, engineering talent and the startup ecosystem is very, very unique for India. So more than, while cost is an important thing for getting into the market and sort of differentiating in the initial years, I think this cyclical effect will definitely drive a lot of things forward. And picking up on what Chaithanya talked about, I think support is very important because there are, over the last 3-4 decades, there's a lot of talent out there that has been calling, global customers in different geographies, right? And that itself, from an outbound sales perspective, we're able to do it for SaaS out of India. It'll take years for any other country to catch up. So I'm super bullish and optimistic about this.
No, absolutely. And I also feel like, even with COVID, right? I mean, the entire race to get digital as soon as possible and also kind of put the entire workforce in a very hybrid mode, right, has put in more pressure on the systems. And I think support plays a very important role there, right, to kind of say that you are turning up for your customers in a big way. Though I hear you when you say that this is also very generational, right? The inflection point that we see today for Indian SaaS is not just a one-time thing. I want to move to you, Chaithanya, also. I mean, we cannot deny the fact that, it is an interesting time that we are living in, right? There is a global meltdown in terms of technology stocks. There are global headwinds that are coming in. There is a funding winter, as how everybody's calling it, that's coming in. So that is leading to cost preservation, right? That is leading to a lot of organizations taking a relook at their own cost structures and multiple things. Now, help me understand this. Though I understand that SaaS would have, you would have longer contracts, and these are like, very situational things. But help me understand, has that kind of impacted revenue lines in any way, right? Especially when you work so closely with all these companies and in supporting them. Has that impacted revenue lines? Is that, somewhere a threat coming into longer term contracts, or are newer, onboardings going slower? How have you seen this entire thing? Because we cannot deny that SaaS would be affected by this as well, right?
Absolutely, right. So we have at least like a data perspective on this particular thing, right? Because Zluri manages thousands of SaaS-based contracts itself. So there were key 3 trends. So what we are expecting was, hey, there would be some sort of deviation in terms of huge deviation in terms of people essentially, renewing existing contracts or essentially going for new contracts, right? So far, we haven't seen any sort of major deviations on this. So there hasn't been any deviations in, especially the cancellation of the contracts itself. So that's essentially going as per plan and every other scenario itself, right? But the primary 2 deviations that usually are coming up is that when companies are typically looking for renewal for the 2nd year or 3rd year, even though if it's a long-term contract as well, right? So most of the companies are looking at renegotiating the 2nd or 3rd year because they're essentially looking at, hey, if I possibly bought a 5,000 license on a certain scenario, right? Because my growth plans have essentially reduced, I'm not possibly looking for that much amount of growth itself. I'm looking at maybe about 3,500 or 4,000 sort of scenario licenses itself. So that renegotiating for the second and third year has essentially changed a lot. And companies are specifically looking at understanding, some sort of predictive model and trying to understand what are the other ones, where should I essentially reach itself? So what would be the right number for me? Because my expansion plan is essentially not as big as what I initially thought right now, especially for the next year or so. So that cutting for also renegotiating the existing contract is something that's currently happening. And the third interesting key trend that's coming up is that companies are right now looking for are long-term contracts, as you mentioned, but the payment for cycles for these particular things are essentially getting staggered a lot. So, for example, in a scenario wherein, hey, probably pay you $100,000 for the year one, but year 2, year 3, I might essentially be paying $200,000 to $300,000. It's either that, wherein they are essentially pushing back the payments on the first year side of things itself until to essentially optimize their particular cost this particular year. Or the second sort of scenario comes in wherein instead of doing a full down payment on this particular year itself for this particular year, let's say you have to down pay $300,000, they're essentially, staggering those particular payments itself so that I pay probably 100K this particular quarter and I divide that up into quarter-wise sort of scenario itself. So these are the key trends that's essentially coming up. But so far overall, in terms of SaaS negotiations itself, because one hypothesis from our end is that they become key to their particular productivity itself. So it's extremely difficult to cut down on a very crucial SaaS application itself. So to realize that might essentially affect adversely for them as well. That could be one of the reasons that we are hoping for as well. That's one of the hypotheses.
Also wanted to ask you, but has that changed the pricing? Has that forced kind of SaaS companies to also think about like innovative pricing now, right? I mean, because that's something that.
So every single particular contract itself, rather than just pricing for I'm getting this particular application, has turned into a sort of performance-based pricing. Or hey, if I'm essentially doing this, I need to actually achieve these 3 goals or these 4 goals itself. Only then I'll possibly be able to essentially pay the next set of amounts. So that sort of control and that sort of to the right word would be ensuring that strictness has essentially come down right now, wherein if I'm essentially paying for something, I'd better get an ROI from that sort of scenario, either a direct or indirect sort of scenario. That's been enforced a lot by the operations and the finance teams as well these days.
Sure, absolutely. Let me come to you, Maneesh. A similar question, but more towards the slowdown that we're seeing in the startup ecosystem. But help me understand that in this entire funding winter, right? I mean, there is nobody who's gone unaffected, right? Like, I mean, we were just looking at the data Freshworks, right, which was and which continues to be, I think, India's SaaS mascot for the longest time, is down 68-70% from its IPO price, right? Even though they're showing strong business growth, even in the latest quarter. Help me understand that. How does that kind of impact, fundraising or this entire global headwinds that the startup ecosystem is kind of facing? Do you think SaaS is quite immune to it? Or would you say that, what you guys also do see the effect of it, but just in a different light? I'm going to lap that on also with the exit question. I know that you guys are very young in your journey as well, but still, I mean, that's obviously the aspiration of every entrepreneur as well as teams to kind of give a great exit. So where do you think all these questions now stand in, especially in the scenario that we are in? Is SaaS immune, or is it still questionable?
I think I'll start off with a disclaimer that I'm a perpetual optimist. And so I always see the silver lining. I don't think anybody is immune, because this is not a SaaS thing, right? This is not a startup thing. There is uncertainty across the world, right? From a financial perspective, from a geopolitical perspective. So every CXO that we talk to, they are sort of cautious. Nobody knows what's going to happen. But at the same time, if you go back to what happened during the US depression when it last happened, the companies or the industries that really grew were construction, mining, railroads, right? This was physical infrastructure that was being set up back then. Correlated to today, it's the same thing from a software and digital perspective. The digital infrastructure is being set up. So I still see investments going into software and infrastructure. I don't see it slowing down. Cautious, yes, but not slowing down. And when we talk about market, Tarush, I think markets are always about sentiment, right? So I wouldn't read too much into a Freshworks, the stock price going down, because if you look at a Microsoft is down 7 to 10%. Apple was also down. Adobe is down a lot more. I remember 800 to 400 something, it's come down. Have the fundamentals changed for any of them? They've not, right? If you look at Microsoft is still showing profit, but because the market sentiments are weird, the stock price is down. Fundamentals haven't changed. So I think the market is cautious. It will recover. It's as long as, whether it's a SaaS company or any other business, as long as they're true to the purpose of serving the customer and growing, I think it's all good. I'm not worried at all.
Sure, but I also understand this is, do you see that, with the markets as however they are, do you also feel the rationale to be like, every other startup to kind of say that, okay, let me also kind of, get in the cash if we are, while our fundamentals are great, we do not know, there is still uncertainty in the future. But is that also into play somewhere to say that, let's kind of grab in the cash if that's coming into us at a decent valuation? Because anyways, most of the global investors today are saying that, we're going to be on a hold for like almost 24 months. And when I say hold, like be more cautious or be more like slowly paced in terms of what we're thinking in terms of our investment. So is that also somewhere going into the psyche of entrepreneurs, especially in SaaS?
It is. So it goes back to sentiments. Rewind 7-8 months, everything was hunky-dory, right? So it's actually changed from a seller's market to a buyer's market, right? And I say the buyers are the investors. So they have the upper hand because the demand and supply dynamics have changed a little bit. So they are calling the shots. Now, for those who were lucky enough to raise funding when it was a seller's market, they're obviously happy. But for others, if they can hang on, because it's all about valuations, right? It's all about when you're going to raise money and it's going to make sense for the company and for the shareholders. So it's a tricky scenario right now. But as I said, I'm a perpetual optimist. I see, things turning around very soon. There are still lots of startups that are raising fund, right? So if you sort of peel the onion, if you look at the US, if you look at India, funding is still on. You might not have frivolous funding going on, which probably happens at peak. That has sort of slowed down. But for those companies that are addressing a market opportunity, are able to execute well, I think things are still fine.
No, absolutely. Dave, were you saying something on this point?
No, yeah, just wanted to share the sentiment like Maneesh was saying. I think that most SaaS companies still are, fundamentals haven't changed, so they're all looking for that profitable growth. And the good thing, SaaS is that unlike some of, let's say, the other B2C companies where I think the directive is look at growth, but look at it profitably. SaaS was always on this profitable growth journey where, your customer acquisition to the overall lifetime value of it was very clear. So I think a couple of things that we at AWS are trying to help companies is, one is, of course, yes, cost optimization, right? That is an absolute critical thing, right? And there are various levers within the platform from a technical side of things, working on the architecture to see how you can kind of continuously reduce cost, right? So it's overall that the specific unit that you see, like every time you add a new customer, how does that give you the the absolute least increment in terms of kind of the cloud cost, right? And we do that through various ways, right? Looking at serverless containers, looking at how do you use kind of unutilized capacity in terms of Spot, kind of which gives you up to 90% discount. So various other techniques that are there. And then also on the marketing side, right? Like, are there kind of market development funds that we can help in from a co-marketing standpoint to help you kind of continue to acquire new customers, right? So I think those are some of the ways that we are kind of trying to support it. But absolutely, I think cost optimization is a critical thing. We saw this, a couple of years ago in the first wave, when COVID hit, where of course it was a lot more severe. Pretty much, companies had come to a full standstill, and we had to kind of go into that mode and do everything we could to save the cloud costs. We are in a similar kind of a mode, just very, very focused on trying to reduce that through a variety of ways and supporting the customers. So yeah.
No, absolutely. And I think that, from the sense that I'm getting from all three of you is the fact that, I know that this is a bright spot, but this is still not unaffected completely by what's kind of going out in the markets across. I want to ask, Maneesh and Chaithanya, you in particular, I just want to bring you guys in on this one is, also valuations, right? Like what we've seen is even companies which are doing good today are somewhere, being more head on the shoulder, let's say, about, what valuations they're asking in the market, because they're staggering themselves for the next 2-3 years, right? Like if there's an exit opportunity, are we too bloated? Are we not too bloated? And a lot of those things. Is that also a major, thought process that's going on, especially, when you're thinking about, let's say, raising funds, right? And, or when you are talking to certain VCs as well, I'm sure that, there would be outreach also, which could be coming in. So, is there that conscious thinking that's coming in terms of what amounts do I want to raise and what should be my valuation, and somewhere even putting the rope to the high flying horse, saying that, hey, listen, no, we need to kind of tame this down a little bit further. So starting with you, Maneesh, and then moving on to you, Chaithanya, on this one.
I think it goes back to sentiment, Tarush. So valuations are not always mathematical, right? There is an emotional value, there is an opportunity value. All of that comes together to talk about valuation. I think if you think from an entrepreneur's perspective, entrepreneurs will always be optimistic on how I can grow my company, how I can provide value to customers, how I can provide value to shareholders. So whenever an opportunity comes where everybody is getting value, that's when the entrepreneur or the co-founders would think about, okay, this makes sense, right? Whether it is raising a fund, whether it is going for an IPO, or even, exiting, sort of integrating with another firm. So it's always about the value that can be provided. I don't think we're in a situation yet where anybody's thinking about distress raising fund or distress sale. We've not come to that. As I said, things are still cautious. So let's not overspend. Let's not, let's look at optimizing costs so that we don't run out of any runway. I think that's the important thing that all entrepreneurs and founders are sort of thinking about. They're not worried about, okay, if I go right now, I'm going to get less valuation. At least I have not been in those conversations with any of the folks that I know. Chaithanya, over to you on your thoughts.
No, Maneesh, you answered the app question absolutely right? So just adding on to that as well. So at least with what I've seen, SaaS business models are essentially, especially when you're getting to the core math of things as well, right? It's a lot more easier. So right now, maybe about a year ago itself, companies wouldn't have essentially gone to their core math itself and understand their business models, understand their exact scenarios on, how long would their particular funding run out, or what would their scenario would essentially look like for a large scenario, for a extremely volatile scenarios as well. So right now, these particular, I would say, rigor in math is essentially coming back to the founders itself. So right now they're very, very focused on understanding where they're currently spending. So all the idea over here is to understand that if you can get a larger runway itself to ensure that we are out of this particular funding winter itself. More importantly, again, right? So this is always a cycle. So a particular company which is able to weather this particular cycle itself that's currently there will be able to do that. Or the worst case scenarios as well, what you would also possibly see is scenarios wherein companies might be raising capital itself, but not in the larger quantities, wherein you would possibly be raising enough capital at possibly the similar valuation or a down round as well, but would not be for let's say larger numbers that we saw in the last few years. Maybe just enough itself just to essentially break through this particular funding winter itself, so that they're able to get their particular valuations back, or are able to essentially get that particular rigor back itself. So that's my particular thought process.
I think Tarush, I can pepper my answer a little bit more. It also depends on the stage of the startup.
Yeah.
Right. So there are many SaaS companies in India. I'm sure it's in thousands right now, but not every one of them have really found the PMF. Right? So those that have, they know what it will take for them to acquire more customers.
Absolutely.
The others are trying to figure out. So I think the situation is slightly different for both of these. And then there's the third category, which is on hyper growth. So the first one will struggle a little bit because the scope for experimentation is lesser, right? So earlier you had money to experiment. Okay, this will not work. Let me try that. Let me try that. Let me try that. So they have to be super cautious. For the next one who have figured out a PMF, it's only about, okay, this is the zebra that's working. How do I get more zebras that I can hunt, right? So without spending too much money, without doing, raising my CAC, how do I go after these zebras? For the high growth one, if they've not raised funds, yeah, that's a different conversation because they're at a stage where they have to grow fast. Otherwise, there's another competitor coming after them. So all three stages have sort of like a different mindset on, what they should be doing.
I also want to move to you, Dev. I think that SaaS and software is definitely such a global opportunity, but it also has its own touch of challenges that's there across different markets, right? How Europe would kind of take in things would not be how the Americas or APAC would look at things, right? And since you have such an operating knowledge which goes across the continents, right? How are you looking at just serving and building for all these different geographies? And I want to just bring in that entire bit about regulation now, right? I mean, every continent is today thinking about data regulation, right? Every government is thinking about this more and more, consciously, right? And really, it's a digital economy and digital democracy in a very big way. So how are solutions now kind of being built in to kind of cater to these different needs and challenges that you see, especially from a regulation standpoint?
Sure. So yeah, I think given I think we have a kind of specific compliance and privacy team that kind of helps us to kind of be on top of a lot of these things, right? Specifically, let's say GDPR. How do we actually handle PII and we actually kind of make it very easy for entrepreneurs to, let's say, through a list of kind of best practices and checklists, we call it kind of a cloud formation template. How do we actually put in the right security and compliance in place, right? So that you can easily go through the audit part to make sure that you're able to scale that, or you're able to kind of launch it into a new market. So that's really what we kind of enable and do, right? So I don't want to kind of get into the details, but broadly, obviously it's an area that's very, very important for us. We're available across regions and geographies, and we'll just make sure that from the get-go you can comply with the relevant requirements, right? And also we do see like another trend, although it's largely about being multi-tenant and being able to deploy on a single instance for any of our customers. In some cases, we do see customers who, let's say, want to deploy the solution in the enterprise environment, right? So we also have to be able to help our customers from an architecture standpoint, be able to not just offer it purely as a SaaS, but also be able to install it in the customer environment. So that's another interesting thing that we see in certain SaaS companies who are going, let's say, particularly in the Fortune 500 or the top enterprise customers, if they look to deploy, right? So those are a couple of the challenges as you kind of expand globally, which we are able to support.
Sure. Coming to you, Chaithanya and Maneesh, the market was wide and crazy, and I know Maneesh spoke about sentiment, but in terms of talent, it was just crazy when we saw towards the last quarter of 2022 what's been coming until 2021, right? And especially the tech wars. It was insane to see India at that inflection point. But great for the techies in the ecosystem. So I wanted to kind of get in a sense from you saying, where is the technology war for talent at, especially in the SaaS segment, right? Has sanity finally prevailed? Have also the things that you see while hiring also changed? Have the optics for that also changed now? Because now I think everyone is like curling in and saying that there are not so many opportunities out there. Let me start with you, Chaithanya, on the talent wars that's coming in, because it's so critical for Indian SaaS.
Well, absolutely, right. So again, as you mentioned, it was a war that was essentially there itself. There have been a lot of scenarios itself, especially for a 2-year-old company like us itself, so trying to compete against larger sort of companies itself, or companies who essentially raised larger sort of rounds as well, right? So again, right, so what's important over here, at least what couple of things that we wanted to ensure is we're getting the right set of people itself at possibly not at that exorbitant sort of cost itself, so that it's something that we've seen itself, which is also a cycle wherein you will not be able to sustain that particular growth itself, and that's essentially going to trickle down to a lot of other areas itself. So it's not just the tech, you probably have to percolate that particular thing to multiple different domains. So that's something that we understand and realize that this might not be the scenario for us. So we've done two things differently, right? Number one was possibly get the right set of people, not just coming in, people who are not just coming for the just for the exorbitant packages itself, but most likely essentially giving lucrative ESOPs, or possibly ensuring that there's a good work culture that's currently there at the organization. So that's been our secondary sort of modes of essentially enticing people itself to join us. And one other constant thing that we're essentially doing, that is nurture fresh talent, right? So we've essentially gotten almost 20 different interns from IITs, BITS, and VITs, and the other ones itself. And to be nurturing this particular talent itself for the last year and a half itself, to essentially compete or possibly get them to such a stage itself wherein they're almost equivalent to possibly a 4-year experienced person itself, because they've been trained and focused towards essentially building what you're essentially looking for itself. Again, they can't take up things on their own, but they become solid individual contributors as well to essentially percolate your particular growth itself, and essentially get that extra bit of support that you essentially need in these. That helped us a lot.
So let me move to you, Maneesh. You've also had the experience of working across Adobe, SAP, WizIQ, multiple of these companies, right? And now being on the entrepreneurship and the startup side in a very, very big way. How did you see that, entire thing? And, what's your view now in terms of technology talent, right? Like, because companies were changing strategies in a very big way to also kind of induct these individuals in, and HR strategies were changed. A lot of those things were changed to kind of make it lucrative for these, tech talent to kind of join them. So where did you see it, and where do you see it now?
I think from my perspective, there are different lenses to this. So for this question, I will say it's the seller's market. And so if I look at a techie, it's spoiled for choice, right? You have opportunities in the GSI, the GICs, and SaaS companies, and B2C startups, even in enterprises. Everybody's going digital. So the opportunity is there. So you will always have supply demand, and that's where cost and price and salary packages will come into play. But the other lens also is from a SaaS perspective, right? If you rewind 10, 20, 25 years ago, you read about a lot of courses on quality of delivery, SCI, CMM level 5 and stuff like that. That was required because the GSIs were booming. You needed more quality, more standardization processes. So these trainings were available. Now, when you talk about SaaS, you're talking about talent of product management. You're talking about talent of pricing, compensation of salespeople. So there's a very different skill set that SaaS companies need. Is that talent readily available today? No, it's not, right? So there are those startups in B2B SaaS that have come up over the last 10 years where talent have grown, so they're in demand. Fast forward 5-10 years, it will stabilize, right? That's when you will have a lot of people who've been through the cycles, have been through growing global companies in SaaS as a product manager, as a sales manager, as all of these roles. So it'll standardize. It's already standardized on the GSI side. So both of these factors, I would say, will be in play for a few more years to come.
So I think we're almost running out of time, but I'll quickly kind of make a gun for like 2 questions. I mean, just following up to this particular question, and this is posed to all 3 of you, right, is that we've also seen over the last year a loss in terms of technology talent, right? Whether we're talking about Web3, whether we're talking about crypto, those startups are kind of going in to, like different geographies, like whether it's Dubai, whether it's Singapore, where there are more kind of lucrative regulations for them, right? But that's also taking away the tech talent in a very big way. So, how do you see the mass leaving of tech talent, is like, some of it is called, because somewhere we also saw that in 2015-14, deep tech startups didn't have a space in India at all, right? They were all moving to California to kind of somewhere be there. Do you see that that era is returning in a bit, especially with newer global technologies being, at the fray of the next decade for the startup ecosystem? Let me start with you, Chaithanya.
At least with my experience, it hasn't actually happened so much because right now, at least with what I see, it's kind of happening the other way around because a lot of deep tech startups, a lot of let's say vertical SaaS, a lot of Web3 startups itself are kind of emerging out of India itself, primarily because people are essentially looking forward to these particular ones. Because honestly, I would say 3 years ago, if you're possibly mentioning that I'm actually doing a deep tech startup, a lot of people itself, including VCs and women, were essentially taking aback, saying, I'm not too sure when this would essentially be done, or it has a higher time to essentially yield results itself, right? So, but that sort of thing is actually changing. If you look at space startups itself or any areas, so these are the new ones which are essentially coming across. And at least what I believe is that that's a market that's currently opening up, because you see SaaS not only in the areas about just engineering SaaS sort of scenarios itself, but also opening up in other side of startups as well, which is extremely good because of the relaxation of certain regulations made the space side of things itself, or possibly looking at Web3 sort of scenarios as well, wherein India is essentially leading that particular race itself against multiple different other companies as well. Or if you're probably talking about let's say if you're talking about let's say deep tech startups, or probably the generic sort of startups as well, right? So companies are essentially finding that niches itself that they would essentially do that, and are betting against that itself, either against global players, or we also start seeing new categories essentially being curated right from India as well. So that's what I'm extremely bullish about Indian complete startup ecosystem itself.
So newer categories being created out of India. Dave, what's your hot take? Are we susceptible to lose a lot of talent in this entire talent, or is it global versus India?
No, so I think similar to what Chaithanya said, I think from a regulation standpoint, we do see a few of the, let's say, Web3 crypto startups, maybe moving out of India. But from a talent standpoint, I see that it's irrespective of location, right? Like for certain niche areas, you would go to whichever location that you need to kind of get access to that, right? But overall, I think we have, as a country, we're fairly well placed to be able to give that, to continue to be the the place where people will kind of dip into from a talent pool standpoint, right? And also to Manish's point, definitely from a, let's say, a SaaS, let's say from a product management standpoint, right? That particular talent pool is fairly limited today. It kind of comes, obviously, there's a requirement of that comes with experience, right? And so that'll stay within a specific set of companies, and that'll be sought after by a lot of those companies. But I think that's also available for you to kind of tap into over here, right? So so I think that's broadly my view on this.
Sure, Maneesh.
I'm going to take a very different view to this. While I'm a patriot and a nationalist, if you look at any startup, in the end, it's a business, right? So I have to put my capitalist hat on. So whatever is going to make sense for the business, whatever is going to make sense for the shareholder, that's what the company and the entrepreneur will do. So regulations, market opportunity, access to capital, access to talent, all of these come into play in deciding what should be the strategy. So whatever is conducive for the growth of the company, I think that's the decision the founders or the company would always take.
No, absolutely. And I think that with that, we've come to an end to our discussion. And, there is just one last question that I have to ask you. It's going to go around the room. Is according to you, you guys are all operators of this ecosystem and growing this ecosystem fast. What, according to you, will define the long-term success for India as a world leader in the SaaS ecosystem? Starts with you, Chaithanya, moves to Dev, and you, Maneesh.
Sure, right. So I think, as I've been mentioning itself, right. So the largest sentiment is that India has a really, really good, really good potential itself in the next few years. And So I'll explain this by essentially, taking a couple of points what Maneesh has said, right? So India has always been that service side of scenario. Then we've essentially moved to IT side of scenario itself. So we have that particular expertise. So for us to essentially build that particular next set of expertise to a SaaS, right now there are certain capabilities that are essentially missing. Again, it could be a product manager. We have really, really good tech expertise itself over there, but if you're essentially looking at competing against the world itself, right? So it's not just the technical side of expertise. We really need that go-to-market capacity building itself. Wherein when you're competing against larger players inside outside of India, with larger capital and larger essentially funds itself, right? So the only way that we'll be able to compete against that is not just by building tech expertise. You need to have that GTM capacity. For example, if you're looking at product marketing itself, right, for SaaS, there are very, very limited number of people itself who are able to essentially perform at that particular function. And you cannot essentially just keep hiring those particular people itself. You need to start building capacity for this. You need to start training these particular skills itself. There are a lot of these particular gaps. These are people who would essentially need to be trained in these particular areas. And there are a lot of these companies or essentially SaaS companies can actually start training and producing these particular people itself. So if you're able to essentially achieve that, I think we're good. And, we've also seen quite a lot of help, again, essentially contributing back to this complete startup ecosystem itself, right? So that's always been happening itself. If you look at the successful, SaaS founders itself, right? They've been immensely contributing back to the whole ecosystem itself to ensure that the new startups itself, the kind of issues that they've essentially faced, the kind of scenarios they would have actually gone itself, that's been extremely helpful, at least for us. So instead of refiguring out everything else itself, and that's the same sort of thing if it's flowing back to the next generation of founders as well, right? That's the ecosystem that we're essentially building itself, coming back to what Maneesh said itself. And I think that truly will define that particular success in India in the world of SaaS itself for sure.
Absolutely. And I think SaaS continues to be one of the most strongest communities that I've seen actually in the startup ecosystem. Dave, what's your hot take on this?
Yeah, maybe I think we've already discussed, how India is well poised. Maybe just 2-3 areas where I'm particularly bullish about is probably one is on the DevOps area, right? DevOps as a category is an area where you see, and obviously LambdaTest is in that as an example, right? Like any kind of tool to help the developers do a job better. I think that seems to be a very hot area, and we'll continue to see a lot of interesting companies come out of that. The other one is probably Web3. Again, it's a kind of an infrastructure play, but you have a lot of specific problems to solve for. These would be like scaling issues that the L1 networks today, the core networks that are facing, or it could be even kind of solving for like cross-chain portability issues, things around notifications and alerts, right? So we're seeing a lot of interesting kind of SaaS offerings within the whole Web3 area. Even like, let's say, distributed databases, you had kind of storage and database options in Web2. We are seeing that happen now in Web3. So again, I think this will be the second area where I'm like very bullish about. The last one would also is just the whole cloud security, as in cybersecurity area. Right, we see it's a given now that pretty much everybody is in the cloud. People are talking about, and pretty much every enterprise has gone through some kind of a cyber attack, right? And how do you? And there's so many different problems there. Again, we see people kind of trying to focus on one specific security area, and I think that would be a third area where we'll see a lot of innovation. So those are the three I just wanted to share, which I feel would be something to watch out for.
Sure. Maneesh, coming to you, wanted to kind of quickly check. So what will define, according to you, the long-term success of India as a world leader in SaaS?
I think for me, outcomes always matter, Tarush. I would say for every category, whether it is loyalty management, whether it is DevOps, whether it is ERP, financial, whatever it is, Indian SaaS companies should be in the top 3 in each category. That is the measure of success, not an IPO, not a valuation, nothing like that. Whenever any customer across the world is considering a software, an Indian SaaS company should be in the top 3 consideration. That is a measure of success.
Sure, no, absolutely. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for sharing your views and insights with us. It was a great discussion, and we loved hosting you. And I hope that you guys continue to be safe and hope to kind of see you guys in person the next time. Thanks so much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thank
Stay
you.
safe.
Yeah. Bye.